Please enjoy the Completing the Square Korncast. What is completing the square? Before we look at this process, let's multiply this equation out and put the equation in standard form. So the first thing, if you remember, is we're going to multiply x minus 3 times x minus 3. The result of that product, x minus 3 times x minus 3, is going to give us x squared minus 6x plus 9, and don't forget to add 2. And then the last thing we would do is we would go ahead and collect like terms, so 9 plus 2 is 11. So our equation in standard form is going to be x squared minus 6x plus 11. Now, the completing the square process is starting with an equation in standard form and rewriting it in this form right up here. So the completing the square process is taking our equation and performing this process to it to rewrite it as y equals quantity x minus 3 squared plus 2. So now let's take a look at what we have to do in order to make that process happen. To work backwards to rewrite this equation in this form right here, I think the first thing you would notice is that both equations have x squared minus 6x. So let's bring our attention to breaking this 11 into two pieces, in this case a 9 plus 2. When we break this 11 into two pieces, what we end up getting is a perfect square plus 2. And x squared minus 6x plus 9 is a perfect square because we multiplied x minus 3 times itself to get x squared minus 6x plus 9. So it is a perfect square. So I think the name of this process, completing the square, comes from finding this perfect square right here. Complete the square. So our goal is to find this 9 right here. And that is the completing the square process. So let's take a look at what we have. We know that our x squared is going to remain the same, as well as the negative 6x. So let's move our 11 out of the way and just concentrate on the x squared minus 6x. And again, the whole point of this is to find this number right here in order to get a perfect square. And that will complete the square. Well, if in our equation we don't have a perfect square and we need to find that number in order to complete the square, we must use what we're given. In this case, a negative 6x. We can use this negative 6x to give us that 9 by looking at the coefficient of the x, the negative 6. Well, we know negative 3 from the negative 3x and the other negative 3 from the other negative 3x is going to add to negative 6x. Or negative 3 minus 3 is going to give us negative 6. Well, let's think to ourselves, what can we do to this negative 6 in order to get a negative 3? Well, the easiest thing is to divide that negative 6 by 2. Negative 6 divided by 2 is going to give us negative 3. Or in this case, our two negative 3x's. So now let's take a look at that negative 6 and dividing it by 2. Instead of dividing our negative 6 by 2, I'm going to multiply it by 1/2. Negative 6 times 1/2 is negative 3, and that's what we should have gotten if we did our process correctly. Now we need to think to ourselves, what can I do to my negative 3 to give us the 9 we need to get in order to get a perfect square? Well, the easiest thing to do is to square it, because negative 3 times negative 3, or negative 3 squared, is 9. And there's the number that we were looking for. That 9 gives us our perfect square. So now what we're going to do is we are going to add 9 to our x squared minus 6x. And now we get our perfect square. Before we go further, can we add 9 to any equation that we want to? Well, in this case, no. If we add 9 to an equation, we're changing the equation. And remember, we just want to change the way it looks. We don't actually want to change its value. So if we add 9 to our equation, we must also subtract 9 from our equation, because 9 minus 9 is 0. And if we add 0 to the equation, that's okay. So now look what happens. Well, x squared minus 6x plus 9 is a perfect square trinomial, which factors into x minus 3 times x minus 3. And the last thing is 11 minus 9 gives us the 2 that we need. So we rewrite x minus 3 times x minus 3 as x minus 3 squared plus 2. So again, by taking our negative 6 and multiplying it by 1/2, squaring that product, and getting this number right here, adding this number and subtracting this number to our equation, we were able to rewrite this equation in standard form into the original form that we started with. And that is the completing the square process. Completing the square is what we took a look at in the previous demonstration. Please take a moment and write these 4 things down. 1. Move the constant term out of the way. 2. Factor out the a term if necessary. 3. Use b term to complete the square by multiplying b by 1/2, then squaring the product, and finally adding and subtracting the resulting number to keep balance in the equation. And finally, factor the perfect square trinomial and simplify the constant term. By following these 4 steps is how we are going to complete the square. Now that we have an understanding of what the completing the square process is, please proceed to the completing the square examples KORNCAST.